أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وأما الغلام فكان أبواه مؤمنين فخشينا أن يرهقهما طغيانا وكفرا فأردنا أن يبدلهما ربهما خيرا منه زكاة وأقرب رحما رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن استنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين اللهم اجعلنا منهم ومن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر آمين يا رب العالمين. Once again everyone, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. This is another stop in my series of sort of random stops that I'm making across New York and New Jersey before I head back to Texas. Just a little bit of context for this lecture so you're not entirely lost in what I'm doing. I'm engaged in conducting a series of lectures on trying to understand Surat Kahf in better depth. And I've been doing that. I left the surah, the study of that surah, a few years ago. I got up to ayahs maybe 67, 68, something like that. And then I got involved with work in some other surahs, and now I've come back to this surah. Thank you so much. I never drink during a lecture. Have you ever seen me drink during a lecture? It's never happened. I can't do it. If I drank, I forget everything I was going to say. Completely. Okay, but anyway. So like I just forgot everything I was saying. Where am I? Anyway, so I'm working on, I was working on some other surahs for a few years, and then I've, alhamdulillah, finally had the chance to come back to work on Surat Al-Kahf. And in my work on this surah, I actually only came to New York for a short meeting, met with a friend, and one thing led to another. I ended up giving a khutbah at 96th Street, giving some durus there, and I just kept hopping from masjid to masjid. And before I left, I would feel incomplete if I didn't make a stop at the place where I learned Quran to begin with, the Muslim Center of New York. So I'm really glad to be here again. It feels home every time, alhamdulillah. So I'm going to talk to you about ayahs number 80 and 81 of Surah Al-Kahf today. These ayat are towards the end of the story of Musa alayhi salam and Al-Khadir. So in that journey, towards the end of that journey, where Khidr, Urdu speakers, South Asians, we call him Khizr, right? The correct pronunciation in most of us is Khadir. Khidr or Khadir, right? So I'll pronounce it Khadir. So Khadir alayhi salam is now explaining himself, and he gets to the second incident that he's explaining. So there were 3 stops that they made. They stopped at a ship that he damaged. When they reached the shore, they found a child. According to the narration in Hadith, they found a child that was playing with other children. And they went up to him and he met him, and then Khadir killed him and violently killed him. And it shocked Musa alayhi salam, and he questioned him. And then basically by that point, they reached the end point, and he said, قَدْ بَلَغْتَ مِن لَدُنِّي عُذْرًا. You already have enough excuse to leave me now, but if I ask you another time, fine, if you allow me to continue, even though you have enough reason to leave me already. Right? So that's basically what Musa alayhi salam told him, because he couldn't bear what he saw. And then third time, it was actually something much more mild. They stopped at a town where they tried to get some food, and nobody would show them any hospitality. And Khadir alayhi salam, they both actually ran into an old wall that was very large in the middle of town that looked like it was about to tip over. I didn't do that. Okay, so it looked like it was about to tip over. And so Khadir alayhi salam on his own rebuilt the wall. And that was a side little detail that Musa alayhi salam did not help in the building of the wall. فَأَقَامَهُ, not أَقَامَاهُ. Right? فَوَجَدَا فِيهَا جِدَارًا يُرِيدُ أَنْ يَنْقَضَّ فَأَقَامَهُ. The mufrad is used. And Mufassirun even discussed why that was, because Musa alayhi salam was so scared that if I do something without him telling me, it might constitute the third strike. And he might say, this is it, I can't be with you anymore because you did an action without my permission. So he didn't even get involved in the building of the wall. But by the end, they were leaving. They haven't eaten anything. Remember, they got there hungry because they were looking for food to begin with. And now they've done enough labor to reconstruct an entire massive wall in town. Or he's done it, and then he's heading back. And he just made a comment. He didn't ask a question. He made a comment. And the comment was, لو شئت لاتخذت عليه أجرا. Had you wanted, you could have taken some compensation for that work that you did. And that constituted the third, even though it wasn't said as a question, it constituted the third question. So Khadir alayhi salam said, "Hada firaqu bayni wa baynik." This is the parting between you and myself, right? And I've discussed these parts. I'm going super fast now because I've spent hours on each of these phrases already. That's part of the series already. But where are we now? Khadir alayhi salam then told him, "Sa'unabbi'uka bita'wili ma lam tastati' alayhi sabra." I'm going to inform you in great detail, from his point of view, great detail. From our point of view, not great detail at all, because the first incident is one ayah. He explained it in one sentence. The second one, two ayat. Third one long ayah. It's not some pages of explanation. You know, like when you go to court and somebody has to explain why they killed somebody or why they damaged. Are they going to say one sentence and say, "Thank you, Your Honor, I'm done with my explanation"? They're not. They're gonna have to explain, write up an entire transcript and give every full detail. Yet Khadir alayhi salam is giving one sentence, two sentences for each of these incidents. What I mentioned already in the last lecture, a couple of things about the second incident, which was the killing of a child, is that this is the one that's the hardest one to understand. Because you see, the ship that was being damaged, he himself explained that there was a king who had issued a verdict to seize all the ships that are still functioning, because he was going to commandeer them. If you don't know the word commandeer, it's to seize with authority so that he could, absorb them into his navy. He was going on some expedition. He needed more naval power. So it didn't matter if it's the fisherman or it's some old man or whoever, it doesn't matter. Just grab every ship. And actually the word used was غصبا, right? أن يأخذ كل سفينة غصبا. And غصب is actually used, I described when you grab an animal from the hair and you rip the hair out. You don't shave the hair, you don't soften the skin, you don't prepare it like waxing or something like. No. You just violently tear the hair off. That's actually called ghasb. And so the king didn't care who he was taking it from and how he was taking it and who would get hurt in the process. It might even imply that if the king caught this ship, he would have actually turned them into slaves to work on their own ship as slaves at his service. So this part, this rationale, this is why I damaged the ship, essentially, is actually partly understandable even without the ghaib. Why? Because, it could be that Khadir alayhi salam knows that the king has issued this, he's doing this. But this is not news of the unseen, it's just news of a distant place. Some people know, some people don't know, right? So it's not like only Allah has this knowledge, because a king has issued a verdict, so other people can know. So it's possible that Khadir alayhi salam has heard or knows that the navy is heading this way, and it's not some wahi that has come to him, which might even help us understand the words aradtu an aibaha. I intended to do the damage to the ship. He didn't attribute this one to Allah. He attributed it to himself, that I intended to damage the ship. That's because a king was going to come and take their vessel. But the thing that I want to recap really quickly now is, imagine if you're one of those poor people that work on the ship. You barely have enough to make for yourself, and you're working as fishermen or diving for pearls or whatever you scour for at the bottom of the sea. This is your job. It's a threatening job, and you're not making enough, because if you were making enough, you wouldn't be called masakin. فَكَانَتْ لِمَسَاكِينَ يَعْمَلُونَ فِي الْبَحْرِ. So they're miskin to begin with. Now, the only way they have of putting food on the table for themselves, for their old parents, for their children, for their spouse, for their younger brother and sister, the only rizq they had was this ship where they could make a little bit of money or get some food. That's gone too. That's gone also. So they're completely, not only did they almost die, but they're now in despair. They're completely desperate. But minutes later or hours later, the naval vessels show up and they're inspecting their ship, and they say, "This one's no good, let's keep going." And these guys who are so terrified and so depressed that their ship has been damaged are like, "Man, that ship getting damaged was the best thing that ever happened. Oh my God, can you imagine if it was okay? Can you imagine if it was in good shape?" In other words, what I'm trying to get at is, from their point of view, from the fisherman's point of view, they could see the benefit of something bad that happened soon after. They could see it. So they don't look back and say, "I can't believe our ship got damaged. Even now I get traumatized from that memory." They don't. They're like, "Man, subhanallah, how Allah plans. Imagine if the ship wasn't damaged. Wasn't that an amazing thing?" And they're actually looking back at that incident, not as a bad thing, but as a Good thing. And the only reason they see it as a good thing is because they saw for themselves what would have happened if it wasn't damaged. They saw it, right? They saw the naval vessels come in and leave their ship alone. But this is very different from the second incident, which we're on now. In the second incident, a child has been murdered. A child has been murdered. And I want you to just, the Quran, we sometimes read Quran, read tafsir, read these things and we pass by. Like Allah complains about people who read the Quran and don't ponder and says, لَمْ يَخِرُّوا عَلَيْهَا صُمًّا وَعُمْيَانًا. Those who, when they come across the ayat of their Rabb, they don't stumble over them deaf and blind. They don't even think about it and keep going. Stop and ponder for a second. Imagine yourself on that beach. Imagine yourself 100 feet, 200, 300 feet away, and you see in a distance two men. You don't know they're Musa and Khadr, you just see two men. And you see some kids playing at the beach. And you see this man come and he violently attacks a child and kills him in front of your eyes. Is there any possible way you would imagine this is a good thing? No. There's no way you can process this as a good thing. And then on top of that, Musa alayhi salam obviously says, this is an evil you can't even justify. How do you know it? There's no logical explanation for the kind of evil you did because he used the word nukra. لَقَدْ جِئْتَ شَيْئًا nukra. The word nukr comes from something unheard of, unfamiliar, irrational, something that cannot be explained. Nobody can ever come up with some justification where this is okay. This is never okay. This is never okay. And I'll repeat something from the previous dars. The fact that Musa alayhi salam could not have sabr, right? We misunderstand this part of what Allah is saying as, oh, he didn't have enough sabr. Actually, this is a praise of Musa alayhi salam. This is actually a praise of Musa alayhi salam. What did Allah's Messenger tell us, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? Man ra'a minkum munkaran فليغيره بيده فمن لم يستطع فبلسانه ومن لم يستطع فبقلبه وذلك أضعف الإيمان. Whoever sees an evil among you, try to change it with your hand. If you can't, at least speak out against it. If you can't, at least hate it inside of your heart. Musa alayhi salam can't change it with his hand because he knows that man is acting as a messenger of Allah. He's been sanctioned by Allah himself. So the very least he can do is what? This is wrong. You can't do this. And he's doing exactly what the Torah has taught him. He's actually living by the book of Allah. When you see something wrong, you should stand against it. And you know even the ayah that we read in the Quran, فَكَأَنَّمَا قَتَلَ النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا, that if you kill one person, it's like you killed all of humanity. You've heard this before, right? That's actually مُصَدِّقْ لِمَا أُنزِلَ فِي التَّوْرَاتِ. It's actually confirming what was already revealed to Musa alayhi salam in Torah. So Musa alayhi salam doesn't see one murder as one murder. He sees this as a murder of what? All of humanity. So it's not something small to him. Add to that Musa alayhi salam has seen the murder of children before because he lived in Egypt under Fir'aun. And he was one of the children who was supposed to be murdered, in fact. Right? So there are things from his own life that are now coming back and acting as a trigger in what is happening in front of him. But what I left off yesterday, I couldn't finish my dars in New Jersey, so I'm gonna take you through a little bit of it and then continue where I left off. And where I left off was this. Just like I asked you to look at things from the fisherman's point of view, now try to think of things, this is going to be hard, think of things from those parents' point of view. Those parents who just had their child murdered. Those fishermen, a few hours later, they said, thank God the ship was damaged. That was great. Alhamdulillah, it got beat up. You know, so we almost drowned. So what? Look at what Allah saved us from. But those parents who get the news that my child has been brutally murdered by some stranger, and there's no rhyme or reason, there's no logic, he wasn't robbed, he wasn't asked for anything, there was apparently completely insensible, irrational, inexplicable act, right? And you can't even live with it easily because, you know, and many people Allah tests with the loss of a child. Yeah, may Allah not test you and myself with that test. But sometimes people lose their children to a disease. Sometimes people lose their children to a car accident, right? Sometimes people lose their children because they drowned or something like that, right? Accident or disease or sickness and things that were out of our hand, right? But you know the kind of death of a child that would be impossible to cope with is when a child is murdered. When a child, because if a child died of sickness, at the end of the day, you can say this was the qadr of Allah, whatever Allah willed, this was out of our hands, this was in Allah's hands, etc., right? But when a child is murdered, then there's somebody else's hand that you saw. Somebody else did this. And the thought of, why did Allah let this person get away with it? Why didn't he stop them? And it's much more difficult to even, eventually even cope with what happened. Much, much harder. And so Allah hasn't just given us in this story a scenario where some trial happens. He's actually mentioned probably the most difficult trial in the life of a human being, the murder of their own child, for no explicable reason. It's not even they were living in a war zone, or they were, or they were in some high risk place. It's none of those things. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this child has been murdered. This is very important, because in his explanation, now we get to the explanation, Khadr alayhi salam is going to explain to Musa alayhi salam. He says, وَأَمَّا الْغُلَامِ فَكَانَ أَبَوَاهُ مُؤْمِنَيْنِ. As for the boy, both of his parents were believers. Both of his parents were believers. This is not helping. This is even making it worse. So they were believers. This is what they deserve if they're believers? This is the gift of their iman? No, somehow everything Khadr will say is going to help us understand what's going on. This is, before I go on, I have to give you and myself a disclaimer. This is really important to understand. This is some of the hardest part of the Quran, by the way. To understand the wisdom of Allah Azza wa Jal, the curtain that He's lifted in these ayat is not lifted elsewhere. So this is a unique place in the Quran, and it's so difficult to understand. Even Musa alayhi salam had a hard time understanding. You get that? So it's not an easy place. But there are some disclaimers that are necessary. Let me tell you. Let me just go back to the ship for a moment. The ship got damaged. Why did it get damaged? So they could keep making their income. Yes? But did all the ships get damaged? No. Didn't the king seize many other ships? He did. And they may have been masakin too. Right? And all of those Allah was allowing to happen. And then Allah will give the rationale here that these parents were believers. And this child, I'll explain how bad he was going to be later, but he was going to grow up, let me make it simple English, he was going to grow up to be a bad man. He was going to be an evil person, right? And he was going to make his parents' life miserable. I'm really watering it down, but just essentially he was going to grow up to be an evil person, right? But there are plenty of people who grow up to be evil people, whose parents are good. You don't know that? We don't know that Nuh alayhi salam's son grew up to be pretty bad? That's even in the Quran. If this is the logic, it should apply over there too, right? If this is the rationale, why are Yaqub alayhi salam's sons getting away with kidnapping Yusuf alayhi salam? If they were going to grow up to do such a bad thing, then there should have been some Khadr intervention there too, right? There should be a list of Khadr-worthy kids. But that's not how the world works, is it? That's not how the world works. And if this is how the world worked, then every time there would be a killing, we would say this must have been a good thing, right? But we don't say that. Even the Quran doesn't say that. Why would the Quran be okay with killing when the same Quran tells us you kill one person, it's the same as what? Killing all of humanity. Killing all of humanity. If this was eventually a good thing, why, even if Musa alayhi salam killed someone by accident and that happened, why is he making istighfar? Allah could tell him, this is بَلْ هُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. This is good for you. This person was going to do a lot more other crime. You did the world a favor. You saved him from his parents. That's not what Allah says. That's not what He says. Why am I telling you this? Because even though Allah has put this ayah in the Quran, what happens sometimes is we develop a myopic view. We look at one ayah and we say, now I understand the wisdom of Allah. No, you don't. You understand one case. One case. And in some people's story, getting their ship damaged was the best thing for them. And in other people's story, getting their ship caught by the king was the best thing for them. And for some people, the death, somebody's death, was a favor. And for some other people, it might still be a heavy trial and something else. Allah does the same exact thing for completely different reasons. You cannot say every time Allah does something, oh, this must be just like the Khidr. Somebody, if we develop this kind of evil thinking, and I call it evil thinking, somebody's child dies, by the way, haven't you read Surat Kahf? Maybe your kid was going to grow up to be a serial killer, so Allah did you a favor. I mean, I'm here at the janazah, you should have sabr. Let me help you with your sabr a little bit. You're mu'minain, mashallah. So khashina an yurhiqahuma tughyanan wa kufra might apply to you. You should be grateful that you were raising baby Hitler. So Allah did you a favor. So this kind of thinking is extremely problematic. Extremely problematic. And the way we can help ourselves not fall into this kind of thinking, even from the Quran itself, is pretty easy. I keep referring to this over and over again because I think it's one of the most fundamental parts of understanding the story. When Khidr alayhi salam boarded the ship, before they started this journey, Musa alayhi salam and he had a conversation. This is in Bukhari. This is in some other hadith narrations too. They had a conversation. And in this conversation, Khidr alayhi salam told him, your knowledge and my knowledge is nothing more than this bird. They saw a bird that pecked its beak into the sea twice. Naqra'u naqratain. He said, my knowledge and your knowledge is just a drop from the sea, like this bird is pecking from the sea. Okay, now this is really important because this is the only actual lecture Musa alayhi salam is getting. Everything else is just be quiet. Innaka lan tastati'a ma'iya sabra. This is the only dars he's getting from this muallim of his, this teacher of his. And what's that lesson? Everything Musa alayhi salam knows about the Torah, about the previous prophets, about the hikmah of Allah, about halal and haram, about right and wrong, about morality, about spirituality. All of it amounts to how much? A drop from the ocean. And this is from the side of revelation. From the side of revelation. And on the other side is ilmul haqiqah, the reality of things. Why did something happen? Why did that car accident happen? Why did coronavirus spread all over the world? Why is there a Delta variant? Why is there this? Why is there that? Why did this person die? This person was so young and they died. Why is this person so old and they got sick and they didn't die? Why did this, why today? Why not tomorrow? Those whys, the answer to them is in ilmul haqiqah, the knowledge of reality. And Khidr alayhi salam has been given some of ilmul haqiqah. He's been given a drop of that, a drop. Now the analogy of the drop is really important. What did he say about the ship? He said that when the ship was damaged because the king was going to seize the boat. But was there one miskin on the boat or many? There were many, masakin. And each one of them have their own family. Each one of them have their own, there's an effect of the ship being damaged on their families, themselves, their parents, their surroundings. There's ripple effects, there are domino effects of a single act, yes? But the only thing Khidr alayhi salam knows is one part of the reason. Which reason? That the king was coming to get the ship. But the reasons are much more. But the only one he was, you can think of it as that the rest of the file is classified. And only this much has been given to him, the drop. And the rest of it that is connected to that drop, the rest of that sea, he doesn't know. So now he comes to the second part. And he says both the parents were what? Believers. Okay, so now their iman must be really important to Allah. In this particular case, these two parents, their faith is really important to Allah. So what does Allah say about them? He said, فَخَشِينَا أَن يُرْهِقَهُمَا. I'll focus on the parts I didn't talk about before. And if you are interested, I would really urge you to go through the dars from the last dars on this ayah also, because there are details I won't be talking about today. فَخَشِينَا, so we were afraid. Here, Khidr alayhi salam himself is speaking, because we don't attribute khashiyah to Allah Azza wa Jal. Khashiyah means fear or concern, but that word la yaliqu billahi Azza wa Jal. It's not appropriate to use that word for Ar-Rabb. So it's Khidr alayhi salam saying, we were concerned, an yurhiqahuma tughyanan wa kufra, that he was going to snatch them up, grab them, overwhelm them with tughyan and kufr. And this is where I'm going to spend a little extra time on today. What was so bad about this kid? What was he going to do? The word is rahaq. And in Arabic, before Islam, for hundreds of years, thousands of years even, they would say rahaqat al-kilab as-sayda. They would say when hunting dogs are catching a rabbit or some animal, when they catch up to it, they jump, they pounce, and they land on top of the animal, and the animal is much smaller and weaker, so it gets pinned on the ground and it's under the claws of the predator that's about to take it out or snap its neck. Or like the lion that catches up to a deer and pounces on it and it falls, and now the deer can't move because the lion is too strong, its claws, its legs are too strong, its weight is too overbearing. That act of the predator overrunning its prey and crushing it under itself, that's actually called rahaq. It's used in the Quran in different places. فَزَادُوهُمْ رَهَقًا, for example. تَرْحَقُهُمْ قَتَرًا. The verb is used in other places in the Quran too. But this is the image that comes from this verb. This is the word that's usually used in the mujarrad form, rahaqa. Rahaqa. But here, yurhiqahuma, for those of you that are a little bit familiar with Arabic, it's the if'al pattern. It's irhaq. It's not rahaq, it's irhaq. What that means is, not only did he pounce on them, he used something to pounce on them. So you could say, for example, the lion grabbed the prey with its claws. So that additional with its claws, that extra detail, that would be in the if'al pattern. That wouldn't be in the mujarrad pattern. So here what you find is, yurhiqahuma, he would grab them, but there's a with after that. There's a maf'ul bihi thani, which is what? Tughyanan wa kufran. So think of it this way. I want you to stick to that imagery that I'm giving you, a lion grabbing its prey using what? Its claws. So now imagine this son was going to victimize his parents, sink his claws into his parents using two kinds of claws. And those two claws are called tughyan and kufr. That's what he was going to do. And before we discuss tughyan and kufr, what was the result of that? The parents were going to be victims, helpless, crushed, can't get out of the situation, wishing that the way, like the animal wishes that the lion wasn't there. There will come a point that these parents are going to wish that the son was never born. Sometimes parents have these dark thoughts. My life would have been a lot better. Sometimes, astaghfirullah, a'udhu billah, a'udhu billah. I wish he was, And some parents don't even say astaghfirullah, a'udhu billah. They just say it to their child. Yaar, tum aaye kyun meri zindagi mein? Right? They just say it straight. Really nice of you, by the way. Right? But it could be that someone's under so much abuse, so much, overwhelming oppression, that they might even wish that that relative that is causing them that would somehow can they just die? I'm making dua or not making dua, I'm not sure what I'm doing, but the thought does occur to me. If they could if just one bus, just one Q72 or some, just one time. Because, Corona hit everyone and they're still, they don't even wear a mask and still, But a dark thought will come to them. And how do we know it will come to them? Because the imagery used. Because Allah could have described this as, أَنْ يَظْلِمَهُمَا, He will oppress them. But the imagery used is very comprehensive. This is the entire isti'ara tamthiliya, it's called in the Quran, right? It's an image that's being drawn of the predatorial animal and the animal that hasn't been killed yet, but wish somehow that something would take this predator off of me so I can breathe. These parents were going to feel so crushed that they can't breathe because of the oppression of their child. They were going to be overcome. It was going to bring them to annihilation. This was the worst thing that's ever happened in their existence. This is what they were going to feel. But what are these claws and the pain of these claws that was going to make them feel that? That was going to be tughyan and kufr. So let's talk about that. I'll summarize what our mufassirun have discussed here. People like Alusi rahimahullah in Ruh al-Ma'ani, Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi has talked about this, and others. Tughyan, basic meaning, tajawuzul had. It means when you go beyond a limit. So if you stop at a red light, you're within the hudud. When you cut the red light, you did tughyan. This is why water, beach towns, for example, sometimes they have retaining walls, right? Or on Long Island, for example, we have a lot of sandy beach, right? And that's actually meant to preserve in case the waves get too far, right? And so you have some level of protection against the waters. But sometimes the water crosses the limit. It goes past. A tsunami wave comes, a flood comes, a hurricane comes, something like that, right? When that comes, how does the Quran describe that? Inna lamma taghal ma'u حَمَلْنَاكُمْ فِي الْجَارِيَةِ طُغْيَانُ الْمَاءِ, meaning the water went over its limits. The water went beyond the shores. It came into mainland, right? A flood got caused. A tsunami got caused. That's tughyan. So what we're learning about this son who was going to grow up, he was going to cross limits. Now Allah didn't describe which limits he was going to cross. Now you, as a parent, you can imagine there are limits of respect. There are limits within which you should use certain words. There are limits to your hands. There are limits to your feet. There are limits to your actions. There are physical limits. There are emotional limits. There are verbal limits. There are religious limits, right? And those limits aren't necessarily, because the masdar is being used, they're not limited to the parents. Like he was going to be verbally abusive to the parents. He was going to emotionally abuse them. He was going to insult them and humiliate them. Maybe he was even going to beat them, keep them hostage in their own home, steal all their money. Maybe he was going to do all of those things. But you know what? Tughyan also means that he wasn't just going to do that to them. Maybe he was actually going to go out and be a criminal also. He was going to rob the neighbor also, kill the uncle also, murder others also. And the parents, whenever, even if a child isn't abusive to parents, I've met parents whose children are addicted to some kind of narcotic, or parents whose children have been incarcerated because they got jailed because they were in a gang or got caught robbing somebody or whatever. And those parents are heartbroken. The kid didn't rob the parents, but the parents are still crushed with the humiliation, with the sadness, with the terror of what their son has done. And how can you hate what your child did and love your child at the same time? It's these opposing emotions inside of a human being that are ripping them apart from the inside. It's a miserable existence. It's a really difficult existence. Allah Azza wa Jalla is describing an emotional hell that these parents were going through, not only because he was going to abuse them, but his other crimes were also going to feel like claws sinking into their soul. Then kufran on top of that. And kufr has two dimensions. Kufr actually means disbelief. It also means ingratitude. In other words, not only was he criminal in his behavior, it wasn't even enough that he was wronging humanity. He decided to start becoming blasphemous, disrespectful to his messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or the messenger of that time, disrespectful to Allah Azza wa Jal. I don't need God. What God, Shmad? I don't believe in any of this stuff. You guys believe in these stories. So he would, like Quran describes in other places, in hada illa asatirul awwaleen, that believing parents will be told by a rebellious child, why do you keep telling me about this akhirah business and old stories of prophets and nations destroyed? These are old legends. Get over it. These fairy tales used to work when I was 6 years old. I'm an adult now. Just drop this stuff. Parents are saying, Wailun laka amin. Parents are saying, Wailun laka, it's hard to even translate. But believe. What's wrong with you? Believe. And he's just like, stories. More stories? Mom, really? Please. I had enough of these, okay? So that would be the hell that they would go through, knowing that their child is embracing kufr, embracing shaitan. Not only in his actions, but inside of his heart and his beliefs is one thing. I've even met guys that told, I met one of the most amazing people I've ever met in my life. I actually talked to him on the phone. I won't tell you his name because he'll get upset if I tell you his name. But he worked for I won't even tell you which cartel, but he worked for a cartel. Right, and he was actually, what's a cartel? Yeah, it's a very well organized, much more organized than the masjid organization, and they do da'wah too of their own kind. Yeah, so he worked for a cartel, and he was actually, he made his way pretty high up among the ranks, right? And he eventually got arrested, and he ended up in jail. And in jail, he found Islam. And not only did he find Islam, he started learning. And not only did he start learning, he started teaching others in jail. 6 guys that he told me about, 6 guys, non-Muslims, memorized Surat Yasin with him in jail. And they learned the meanings of each ayah word for word. He told me he listened to my Yasin lectures and paused it every minute and then explained it to them in his language. And they memorized the surah with tafsir. And then when they got out, they went and recited the surah to their families, and all their families are Muslim now. SubhanAllah. He's an incredible human being. I love him to death. I know you're embarrassed by hearing this, but I don't care. I still love you. Okay. So the point is, people like that, right? At one point, even when he was doing bad things, he would tell me something in my heart told me this is bad. This isn't right. I had to silence that part of me, but it was there. It was there. Even in the depths of darkness, Allah says, إِذَا أَخْرَجَ يَدَهُ لَمْ يَكَدْ يَرَاهَا. Not لَمْ يَكُنْ يَرَاهَا. لَمْ يَكَدْ يَرَاهَا means when the person is at the depths of darkness, they take out their hand in the middle of the bottom of the ocean. It's almost as if they can almost not see their hand. Almost. يَكَدْ. لَمْ يَكُنْ يَرَاهَا. There's no possibility for even them to see their own hand. If you can't see your own hand, it represents I don't even realize the evil that I'm doing. But actually, even in the depths of darkness, somebody can see this is wrong. Something in their conscience is still alive. This child that was going to grow up actually was able to murder his conscience. Okay, so he was going to crush them with tughyan, because what part of you maintains the conscience? It's your iman. Some inkling of iman is inside. But what did Allah say? أَنْ يُرْهِقَهُمَا طُغْيَانًا وَكُفْرًا. So there's no iman left. No iman left inside of him. Now there's the other side of this, which is really interesting because there's a duality in these words. A masdar can go in any direction. For grammar students, I know I geek out sometimes. In mathematics, you have a dot and you can draw an infinite number of lines going through that dot, right? When in grammar, sometimes in sentence structure, when you see a masdar as opposed to a fi'il, you can pass a fa'il through it, a maf'ul through it, and the fa'il could become the maf'ul and the maf'ul could become the fa'il. You can draw multiple lines through it. What does that mean in simple English? Let me tell you now. It actually means that he was going to crush his parents to the point where they still loved him so much that they would help him commit crimes. They would cover for him. He'd murder somebody and bury them in the backyard. The cops would show up. Where's your son? I haven't seen him for 2 years. He's hiding in the basement. They would lie for him. They would commit crimes or assist, because out of their love, they don't want to see him caught by the authorities. They love him too much, so they're keeping his secrets for him. And eventually their hearts are becoming hard. They feel bad. They cover for him, then they do istighfar, because they have iman, right? Then they do cover for him and they do istighfar. But eventually when you keep supporting someone in sin, your own heart starts getting darker and darker. So they get accustomed to disobeying Allah, eventually leading them to kufr. They would end up in kufr. And Allah loved these parents that they shouldn't suffer in the sense of their dunya at the hands of their child. And Allah loved for these parents that they should not be put in a test He knows they cannot bear. What's the most unbearable test? The kind of test where you will lose your iman. The test in which you'll lose your iman. There are tests. What does Allah mean that لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها? People ask me all the time, like, well, somebody died of cancer. Allah tested them with cancer, but they couldn't bear it. But Allah said, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. The test is there not about what you can, because people get tortured to death, yes or no? So, لم يسع. Right? كلف بما لم يسع. He got burdened with something he couldn't bear. How do we understand that ayah? The ayah is not talking about what you cannot physically bear or emotionally bear. It's talking about what you cannot bear to the point where you will lose your faith with Allah Azza wa Jalla. That's one powerful way of understanding that ayah. And that's a failure. Everything else, my heart can fail, my liver can fail, my respiratory system can fail. But if my iman fails, that's the biggest failure. All those other failures might even still mean success. This failure, there's nothing left. There's absolutely nothing left. And so Allah Azza wa Jal here is giving us a picture of how He saved two people from their own most beloved child. But I want you to understand the contradiction, the beauty and the terror of this contradiction. It's terrifying, actually. And what's that contradiction? On the one hand, Allah is doing them a favor, because Allah knows that a time will come where they will wish this child never existed. They will wish this. They will see the evil of it, until the point where they will even lose their iman. And He knows this already. So He planned this for them. Somebody might ask them, why did He give them a child to begin with? If He was this bad, why was He even born? Right? The answer to that, did Khadr have? Did Khadr answer that question? No, because how much has been Khadr given? A drop. The drop that he will explain to us answers some questions. Does it answer all the questions? No. And the point of this entire exercise is actually even Khadir alayhi salam cannot possibly have answers to all the questions. To all the questions. A lot of times people have questions, the ones that you can't even ask to Khadir alayhi salam, and they have them for their local imam. Right? You have these questions. People come, why did Allah do this? Why did my mother have to die? Can you explain that to me? What does the Quran say about why my mom died? Yeah. What am I? And then you say you have to trust Allah, everybody's time comes. Yeah, I know, I get that, I read that too, but why though? Why though? Can you like give me a logic? Like, what do you think the Imam or the Sheikh or the scholar or they have like a, let me open up my Ghaib Secrets book that isn't available to everybody. Oh, this is why, because she hates you. No, that's not why. We don't have some answers. We're not supposed to have some answers. And you know what's even cooler and powerful actually is Musa alayhi salam was told by Khadir alayhi salam that the knowledge that he has, the knowledge that Musa alayhi salam has, la yunasibu or la yanbaghi lah, it's not appropriate for him. Khadir is not supposed to know about Torah. Khadir is not supposed to know about what? Torah. Khadir is not supposed to know about halal and haram. He's not supposed to know that. And the knowledge that he has, la yanbaghi li Musa. And the knowledge that Khadir has, who's not supposed to have that knowledge? Musa alayhi salam not supposed to have it. Because imagine if Khadir has knowledge that killing is haram, isn't he getting contradictory instructions? Kill and don't kill? Don't kill and you have murdered all of humanity and knowledge is being told to kill also? No. There are two different worlds of revelation. The revelation of haqiqah, of reality, was something else. There's two different realities that are operating. So they're not supposed to combine. This is why Majma' al-Bahrain was so important. I talked about this before. Because they met where two seas meet, right? And what does Allah say about two seas? He says, Maraj al-Bahrain yaltaqiyan baynahuma barzakhun la yabghiyan. He merged two seas that clash against each other, but they have a barrier between them. They can't cross. These two waters can never mix. The instructions from Allah to Musa alayhi salam and the instructions from Allah to Khadir alayhi salam are two completely different oceans. They're drops from two different oceans. They cannot mix. They're not supposed to be together. They cannot be together. So here, in these ayat now, we get to this part. These parents have now been saved from this horrifying tragedy. And again, I tell you, that doesn't mean that every parent will be saved from this trial. Why are some parents being saved from a trial? And other parents are, Nuh alayhi salam was not saved from his trial. They're not being saved from this trial. Why is Rasul, and by the way, when a child dies, I told you, when a child dies, does it mean now we have the reason why a child died? No. We can't go and say, يُرْهِقَكُمَا طُغْيَانًا وَكُفْرًا. You should be thanking Allah at this janazah. You can't do that. Because this is an isolated case scenario, individual case scenario. So we cannot generalize from it. But what we are learning from this is Allah has a unique story planned for each of us. And the same thing happening to you could be the best thing. And the same thing happening to you, somebody else could be the worst thing. Allah doesn't have He doesn't have the same reasons for doing the same thing. He doesn't have the same reasons. You cannot simplify the hikmah of Allah and just say, I know why He did this, that, or the other. Right? We can never understand that, actually. And this is why فَعَالٌ لِمَا يُرِيدُ is so important. He does repeatedly whatever He intends. And what He intends can only be known by Him, and we can only know drops from His intention when He lets us know. But Allah did this other favor to these parents. It's really beautiful. Not only did He take this child away, which basically think of it this way, being saved from hell is a favor enough. Being saved from hell is a favor enough. But actually, this child, because he was taken before he could become mukallaf, before he could be answerable to Allah, right? He's not old enough yet. He's this child. And Musa alayhi salam correctly pointed out, kana nafsan zakiyatan, right? Aqatalta nafsan zakiyatan, a pure child. When an innocent soul dies, where does it go? It goes to Jannah. Perhaps because of the iman of his parents and a rahmah to them, that they don't even have to see their beloved child suffer in the akhirah. that this child is actually already awaiting them in Jannah. You see? So there's a grander plan of Allah at work. That and by the way, their entire lives, these parents, until the day they die, they will not know why Allah did it. They will never know. Even if you went and told them, by the way, you guys weren't told this, but Musa alayhi salam was told why your child died. I can tell you. He was going to be really bad. This was going to happen. You think that would comfort them? No. It can't comfort them. You could just say, why don't you just tell them? Maybe they'll be at ease. They cannot be at ease because human beings aren't wired that way. We're not meant to know. They can only find that comfort when they go meet with Allah. And until then, they have to learn to trust Him. They have to learn to trust Allah. And that's their iman being preserved. But tafaddulan, additional to this, not only did Allah remove this ailment from them, so whatever trouble they're having, whatever trauma they have, the crying the mother had for years and years at the thought of her child being violently murdered, the experience that she had, Allah is telling us that negative experience in her life, that profoundly sad experience in her life is nothing compared to what she would have experienced. And this Allah knew she can bear, but that she can't. That she can't. And so now what does Allah do? فَأَرَدْنَا أَنْ يُبْدِلَهُمَا رَبُّهُمَا خَيْرًا مِنْهُ. So we intended to replace for both of them someone better than him. Somebody better. Now, you and I know one child can never be the replacement of another child. Just because you have a child, another baby, the one passed away and you have another one, you say, oh, mashallah, alhamdulillah. Like changing batteries. Chalta ye bhi chalega chalo. Doesn't work like that. The sadness of one child will not disappear. And actually, sometimes what happens is a parent has two sons. One son is really badtamiz, beghairat, bandar, whatever he is. And the other son is really respectful, kind to parents, works hard, supports the parents financially, does all this stuff, right? And the rebellious child is gone. Doesn't call, doesn't write, doesn't nothing. I hate you guys. You guys don't understand me. I don't want anything to do with you. I'm an American. And he just goes away. And the other child is still serving the parents. And the mom is every day, hi, mera bacha. Oh my God, my little jugubugu. Mom, he hates you. I'm the one massaging your feet. And the son who's there serving the mother starts getting a little bit, what? Am I not a good enough substitute? Like, he's the one who humiliated you, insulted you, abused you, and you keep missing him, and I'm just here to do the groceries? What's my value? You know why? Because in a human mind, one could be a substitute for the other. But can that be the case? No. Even when our kids are no good to us, we still have something in our hearts for them. And it doesn't mean that a good child will be a good substitute for a bad one. But so then how is Allah saying that he was a replacement? Allah replaced him, actually changed him with something that was better for their iman. Not a replacement for their emotions, like, oh my God, my child, but at least I have a new one. I should be happy now. No more memories of that boy. This is way cuter. No, that's not what's being said. The pain of that child remains. The loss, the memory of that child remains. But then the damage that came with that child has been replaced with someone. Now, what's the description? خَيْرًا مِنْهُ zakatan. The tamyiz is zakatan, which means better than him when it comes to purity. Well, all children are pure. This must be implying that even as this child gets older, he won't become corrupt. He will remain what? Pure. He will remain salih. And that's the word خَيْرًا مِنْهُ zakatan. And then he says, وَأَقْرَبَ رُحْمًا. And he will be, this is strange language actually, أقرب رحمًا. Because actually, ruhm, most mufassirun say ruhm here actually means rahmah. Everybody here knows the word rahmah, rahmat, Urdu speaking people, rahmat, right? Mercy, loving care, that's what rahmah means. So ruhm is actually one of the masadir for it, which means, he would be closer when it comes to loving and caring. I'm literally translating, closer when it comes to loving and caring. So this new son of theirs, or actually most mufassirun say this was a daughter, by the way. I bet you didn't know that. Most mufassirun argue that this was a daughter. And it was really cool that traditionally the great scholars of the Quran saw these two qualities, a child being purer and more caring and loving, and a better blessing for the parents, they didn't see that as a son, they saw it as a daughter. And they gave pages and pages of explanations of why they think it's a daughter, actually. Right? That's true. Thanks. Also more humble. They're also more humble. So, but in any case, Allah, that's just an opinion. We don't know qat'iyyan, we don't know absolutely if it's a boy or a girl, regardless. What I want to share with you here is the language departs from the norm. And the study of balagha in Arabic, or specifically in the Quran, is every time you expect to hear something and you hear something else instead. So here the expectation is akthara ruhman. Akthara ruhman. More loving and caring. More when it comes to loving and care. Love and care. But Allah said aqraba ruhman. Closer when it comes to loving and care. And this builds on the isti'ara tamthiliya, the image that was already presented. Remember the image I gave you of the animal that's being pounced on? If a parent has a child that they never receive any mercy from, respect from, love from, care from, connection from, they don't get anything from that child, then they imagine in their mind a day when their son would actually come and hug, the son would actually come and hug the father and kiss the father's forehead and massage his feet and, apologize to him. He fantasizes about a good child. But it's so ab'ad, it's so far-fetched. And Allah Azza wa Jal used the word to describe this thing that would have been so far away from them. A child that shows love, care, connection. Allah brought that what? Closer to them. So this impossibility became possible for them, and that's captured inside the word aqrab. Because qareeb and ba'id in Arabic actually is used for highly likely or closer to possibility as opposed to impossible. Okay? So they say ab'adu min uqab al-jaw, for example, in Arabic expressions, more impossible than the falcon in the sky. What does that mean? It's easier for you to do this than to jump up and grab the falcon in the sky. So what you're asking to do is super impossible, even more impossible than uqab al-jaw. So that's ab'adu min uqab al-jaw. So here aqraba ruhman, it became a reality for them. It's no longer impossible. Conversely suggesting that with the other child, even one day of love and care would have been impossible. That would have been a ba'id thing. It would have been an impossible thing for them. They could have never experienced it. So Allah brought that closer to them. Now let's talk about this ruhm part. Allah is describing now the ideal child, right? Because this child is catered by Allah to be a blessing for believing parents. So you and I are sons and daughters. Right? So as we read this ayah, we shouldn't just think about what happened in the story. We should think about how Allah in His design decreed that these parents should have a great son or daughter. And this is the Quran's description of a great son or daughter. What is it? خَيْرًا مِنْهُ زَكَاةً وَأَقْرَبَ رُحْمًا. In other words, you living a good life. You and I staying away from sin. You and I attempting to remain pure in our life is actually a blessing for our parents. Like you are not just being merciful to yourself, you are showing an act of kindness to your parents if you are trying to live a good life as a believer, staying away from sin as a believer. And on the other hand, if you are indulged in sin and cannot get out of sin and continue to indulge in more lying, more cheating, more whatever else, then not only are you hurting yourself, you should know always that you are also becoming a torture for who? For your parents, whether they realize it or not. The other is aqraba ruhman, that he's closer when it comes to showing loving care. This is a little bit nuanced, and I'll conclude today's dars with this. You see, the Quran tells us in Surat Yasin, I know our South Asians, we love Surat Yasin, right? It's like, we don't know any other Quran, we might know Surah Rahman, Surah Yasin. So I'll tell you something about Surah Yasin. وَآيَةٌ لَهُمْ أَنَّا حَمَلْنَا ذُرِّيَّتَهُمْ فِي الْفُلْكِ الْمَشْحُونِ. A miraculous sign for humanity is that we allowed them to put their children onto ships that get loaded up. I want you to imagine this image. I know it's off topic, but it's on topic. Just trust me. A sign from Allah is that people get to take their children, back in the day, thousands of years ago, they get to take their young men, your young sons and daughters, and load them onto what? Ships. Now imagine this scene: a large vessel, a large ship about to take off from the docks, and the parents are saying farewell to who? Their young son. Who's on this ship? Where is he headed? He's headed to a new continent, isn't he? He's headed to a completely new land, isn't he? So is he going to see his parents next weekend? Next month? Next year? He's gone for a long time. Maybe they'll get a letter back from him, right? Maybe he'll come back after establishing himself in this new tijara. Maybe a round trip by sea back in the day. Can you imagine? A round trip by sea might be a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Maybe he'll never get to come back. And are both parent and child aware of this reality? They're both aware of this reality. Actually, the Quran didn't say that these people that put their children on ships, those children should be ashamed of themselves because they got on a ship. How did they leave their parents in Pakistan and go and get on a ship or a plane and go get an education? Actually, Allah says this is an ayah for humanity, that Allah created a world in which the next generation has economic opportunities for which you might have to board on a ship and go distances away from who? Your parents. I'm not saying this. Allah Azza wa Jalla is saying this. But you know what? Many of us are raised in a society of self-guilt. So we say, yes, I'm doing my PhD. It's on full scholarship. I'm doing it at Harvard. I'm doing it at NYU. But my parents sent me here, but I feel guilty. I should go back. Go read some Surat Yasin first. Allah Azza wa Jalla opened this door. And guess what? Your parents are happy. They miss you. Yes. Obviously, they're your parents and you miss them. Yes. But this is an ayah of Allah that Allah opened an opportunity. What I wanted to say here is being close emotionally, being close in your akhlaq, being close in your care for your parents doesn't necessarily mean you are literally with them all the time. That isn't possible for everybody. It's simply not possible for everybody. There are some people who couldn't find any work in Bangladesh, couldn't find any work in Pakistan, couldn't find any work in Afghanistan, couldn't find any work in Nepal or wherever else. And they got a job finally in Australia, or somebody got a job in Scotland, and somebody got a job in America, somewhere else. And now the guy's riding a taxi, sending money back home. And he's sitting here crying that, Allah says you should serve your parents and I'm violating an ayah of the Quran. No, bro, you're not. You're fulfilling an ayah of the Quran. You're earning. You took an opportunity Allah gave you to serve your parents. How would you serve your parents? They'd be starving and you'd be pressing their feet. You have to be realistic. Quran is realistic. So here even he says, Aqraba Rahman. And Aqrab is ism tafdeel, which actually means he was going to be closer when it comes to loving care. But the loving care we get from our children is not a constant. It's actually not a constant because eventually they get older and they have their own families to take care of. They have their own responsibilities to take care of. So they cannot be constantly caring for their parents. But they will do, whatever they do will actually be full of rahim. That's what it should be. A reality should be the case, right? So parents, a lot of times children can become abusive to parents, and other times, unfortunately, parents can become abusive to children. They're making a daughter feel guilty because she got married and she lives in a different city. And they're like lecturing her about, tumne to hame chhodi diya hai, hamari kya qadar hai, hum to bas nali ke keechad ki tarah hai tumhare liye. Dropping her. This is how you say salam to your daughter, right? And your son's working hard, providing for his family, providing for you, taking care of you. Tumhare paas kahan time hai? Tumhe kya zarurat hai? Like you gotta just drop. Why? Unnecessary. If they're showing ruhm, there should be an appreciation, right? And so aqraba ruhman actually means from both sides that there was a loving care, and we should reinstall loving care of words between parents and children. That's something that should happen. So Allah replaced these parents with a legacy of a good child and took that bad child out of the equation. It's a very difficult ayah to really to internalize why Allah Azza wa Jal did that. The only rationale He's given us is He was looking out for those two parents, right? He was just looking out for those two parents. And I don't want any of you to have nightmares. Ya Allah, I think I'm a good parent. Does that mean you're going to take my child away? I don't want you to have these nightmares. Because it's not a formula that's being given here that for every parent that's good, there's a good likelihood Allah will save you from your child. That's not what's being said here. So please don't misconstrue it for what it's not saying. May Allah Azza wa Jal give us trust in His plan. May Allah Azza wa Jal bless us with good children. May Allah Azza wa Jal help us realize that the most difficult things we are going through, So long as we have iman, because that's the beauty, the secret of this ayah. So long as we have iman, then the most difficult things we are going through are actually saving us from something much more difficult that we could never have known about. We could never have known about. And whatever we're going through, it's because Allah is looking out for us. It's so hard to imagine a parent who's crying, traumatized that their child was murdered, and at the same exact time, Allah is saying, I did this for them. The human mind cannot understand that this was done for them, but Allah's wisdom is much bigger than the human mind. So all a believer can do is trust that my thinking, my feelings, my heart isn't big enough to understand Allah's rahmah for me. The rahmah of Allah is too big and my heart is too small. So it cannot contain it. So I just have to learn to accept that Allah's plan is still full of love and care. And so as I leave this talk, I remind you of where we started. When Allah introduced us to Khadr alayhi salam, you know what Allah said about him? آتَيْنَاهُ رَحْمَةً مِّنْ عِنْدِنَا وَعَلَّمْنَاهُ مِن لَدُنَّا عِلْمًا. So the easy part to remember is he knew things nobody else knew. Okay, so he knew the kid was going to grow up to be a bad kid. Nobody knows the future. That can only be with him. Fine. But before Allah mentioned that he knew things about the future, he mentioned something else first. He said Allah granted him a special love and care that can only come from him. In other words, everything he's doing, as horrible as it looks, is still an act of loving care directly descending from Allah Azza wa Jalla. Directly descending from Allah. And this is the humility that a believer has to internalize. It's easy to talk about. May Allah Azza wa Jalla not test our iman with trials we cannot bear. This is why we ask Allah Azza wa Jalla, لا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا لا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به. Right? So we make this dua to Allah Azza wa Jalla, and I pray Allah Azza wa Jalla blesses all of us and our families and save us from trials and whatever trials we're going through. May Allah Azza wa Jalla not make that an excuse for us to not have our iman strong in Him. بارك الله لي ولكم في القرآن الحكيم ونفعني وإياكم بالآيات والذكر الحكيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.